let me briefly talk about that midterm, and then we're going to start a session. We are broadcasting this session live to many, many people. So if you're wanted by the police, stay in the back, please. In any state. I don't know, you never know. La rayita quiere decir que está muy bien. That you're hitting the key unit. Ah, we cannot see it? You're going to see it in a second. This means that you're good. This is not good. Then something like this within parentheses, it means that's an option, besides the one that you pick. But if I just put an X and then I put something else, it means that it's incorrect. Whenever you see an X, sometimes you see this is not, you see like this, and then within parentheses another option. Okay? And then this means okay, this means no good, and this is what it should be. In general, for this midterm, I try to give you an A as much as I can, or as close to an A as possible, because I know that the final exam is so suicidal that most people fail it. In 23 years, the highest grade was C+. No, I'm kidding. Only one person got an A. That's Ramon back there. That it's actually very difficult. It doesn't mean you cannot get an A, but I try to give you, because it's all oral. See, so that's why I was very, very nice in terms of the grading. Now that's that. We're going to have today. We're going to talk a little bit about. We're really ahead of the game. We have a few sites to complete today, right? How many do we have to do? 3. Okay, we'll do that. Let's work from now until the break. Yeah, we're going to be working on restructuring, and I'm going to give you a practice to do that you can do some work here in class. It's going to be very interesting. And those of you that are watching, I'm going to tell you exactly where you can go and then download this, the material that I will be distributing here, okay? So you go to simedia.com, and then it's live site.pdf. So if you are watching from whatever, www.scsimedia.com/livesite.pdf is the place where you should go and actually, I'm not connected to a network here, where you can actually download this particular material that I'm going to give everybody in a few minutes, in about half an hour or so. Now, what we like to do is talk about restructuring from Spanish into English, and we have done some of this. This is a technique that I want you to develop. It's a sight translation technique that is very suitable to for those sight readings that are from Spanish into English. And sometimes the sight translation, you know, a paragraph, and it has a lot of commas and a lot of lines and just only one period. This is what this technique is for, to deal with paragraph like that. Now, in most interpreting exams, they usually have 3 versions of the exam. There's always one version where the sight from Spanish into English is heavily dependent on restructuring. So there is a 33% percentage, or 1/3 probability that you will be getting that particular sight translation. We don't know what they're going to use in the next cycle. I can tell you that in the previous cycle, they did not use it. So now we have actually 50-50, okay, because they don't use the same sight readings 2 cycles in a row. So now you have a situation where in the next cycle, that you could get a sight translation that it is very heavy on structure, on restructuring, or not so. If it is not heavy on restructuring, it will be very heavy on vocabulary. So we need to learn a couple of interesting things. And we talked about it in the past that when you transfer something from one language, from Spanish into English particularly, you really need to always look at the subject first, or put it as a subject first plus the verb and then the rest. And we discussed that in the past, that this is the format that is preferable, because in English, when you conjugate a verb, you don't know what the pronoun is, but you do in Spanish. Estudié means I, yo estudié. But if I say studied without putting the pronoun, I don't know. If it could be I, you, he, she, it even. So that's why the format that we want is subject and verb and then the rest. All right? That's important to keep in mind. Now, where is the problem in terms of in transferring from Spanish into English? This sounds very simple. Well, it sounds very simple, but you may see in Spanish structures that begin with verbs. And what is a structure, by the way? Well, if you have a document and you have like, this is like El Ciudadano Juez José Rodríguez, and then comma, and something else, and then something else, comma, something else, comma, something else, period. A segment is defined as anything between the beginning and the first comma. So this will be segment A. This one will be segment B. Okay, segment B. This one will be segment C. And this one will be segment D. In other words, from the beginning to the first comma is A, whatever is in there. Let's say that at the beginning it says, en la Ciudad de México los 15 días del mes de enero del 2015, comma. Okay, that is segment A. And then after the comma comes something else, like for example, el ciudadano juez ha presentado blah, 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 blah. And then there is a comma. That's segment B, okay? So the structure here, the original structure is A, and then there is a comma, B, comma, C, comma, D, period, because that's where it ends. Do you all see that? Okay. So all I'm doing is I'm substituting whatever is from the beginning until the comma by the letter A. And then between the first comma and the second comma by letter B, and so on and so forth. All right. Now, the structures that we prefer, that we like, that we want in the exam are those structures where they don't have a lot, where the structure, I mean the sentences, very few commas, and they already have the subject and the verb together. For example, el ciudadano juez en lo penal José Rodríguez determinó que la orden era válida. So when you go into English, you just simply say, criminal law judge José Rodríguez determined that the order was valid. See, we keep the same word order almost, because it's actually given to you in Spanish. It has the structure that we like in English. The subject, el ciudadano juez en lo penal, blah, blah, blah. Then the verb, determinó, and then the rest, que la orden era válida. Okay? That we like. Those are good structures. But that's not sometimes what you're going to get in your exams. Because in your exam, you may get something like this. Determinando que la orden era válida, está el ciudadano juez José Rodríguez. And you may say, well, what type of structure is that in English? And even in Spanish, it's very odd structure in Spanish. But you have to understand how these documents are written in Latin America. In Latin America, you don't have a court reporter that writes everything word for word. You have a law clerk that writes whatever he or she is seeing at the time. So that law clerk types it on the computer, and if the judge dice, determino que la orden es válida, entonces dice, determinando que la orden es válida, coma. Exijo ahora que presenten documentos, coma. Exigiendo que presenten documentos, coma. Recordándole a todas las partes que deben de presentarse mañana por la mañana. Les recuerdo todas las partes que deben de presentarse mañana a la mañana. That's what the judge says. So the law clerk types after the comma. Recordando que todas las partes se tienen que presentar mañana por la mañana. Y luego pone, está el ciudadano juez José Pérez. That's a very common structure. Now, that particular type of structure does not match the one that we like, which is subject, verb, and the rest. In other words, you have a sentence that begins with the verb, and then a comma, a sentence is a segment that begins with the verb. So in this case, it's determinando, bla, 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 coma, ¿cuál fue? Exigiendo que presenten todos los documentos, bla, 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 coma, y recordando que mañana tienen que presentarse, está el juez, vamos a poner el juez, el ciudadano juez. So when we analyze this, this is our A, This is our B. This is our C all the way up to here. There's a comma usually here. And then the last one is D. So our structure is A, B, C, D, period. But the problem is that D is the segment that has the pronoun. And we don't want it when we go into English. We want that first. So we need to bring this D to the beginning. Put it first. So what the type of structure that we want is D first. And then add something else. And maybe put a period and then D and another thing and D and C. In other words, if I do this type of structure, I can say el ciudadano juez determina que bla bla bla, punto. El ciudadano juez exige que bla bla bla, punto. El ciudadano juez recuerda que bla bla bla, punto. That sounds odd, so you would probably say something like this. El ciudadano juez determina que bla 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 y exige que bla bla bla, punto. Además, dicho juez recuerda que bla bla bla, punto. Now the structure is ready to be transferred into English because now you have the subject, the verb, and the rest. So you will say, the judge determines that blah 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 and demands the presentation of evidence. Then you put a period. Furthermore, the set judge, S-A-I-D, set judge reminds everybody to come back to court tomorrow morning, period. Now you have a transfer not only in vocabulary, but also in structure. That's it. You nail it in the exam if you do that, okay? So that's one problem, all right, that we have. Now, there is another problem that we have with structures that we have to be extremely careful. And here, you know, I think it's pretty clear. You have to put the pronoun first, or the subject, I should say, first of the sentence, and then the verb, and then the rest. Now, you may also have a situation like this. Look at this one, for example. Oh, let me just go back in case you're still writing it down. El juez, quien tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales, determinó que la orden es válida. Es válida. Okay, so that's a short structure. I'm specifically using a short one here, short structure or sentence, to basically make a point. You can certainly leave it the way it is in English. You can say the judge who has jurisdiction in criminal matters determined that the order was valid. And because it's a very short structure, but you will see that it is not the case in the documents that you will see. But the principle remains the same. So I pick a very short sentence simply so that you can somehow you can understand what I'm trying to say. Now, we always want the subject or the pronoun and then the verb. We want to have these two together when we transfer that into English, if at all possible, then the rest. But what happens here is that we do have el juez, that's our subject, but we have determinó right here, too far. Now, in this sentence, because it's short enough, if you have the right enunciation, then it's okay. But in general, you may have a situation like this, for example, el juez, coma, quien tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales, coma, los asuntos que se presentan en este juzgado, coma, el cual está ubicado en la Ciudad de México, coma, el cual es la capital del distrito en el que rige este estado, coma, determinó que la orden es válida. Now, when you transfer something like this into English, the verb is so far from the subject that it loses, the segment makes no sense. But in this example, I didn't want to give you something so complex. I want to give you something simple because the principle remains the same. And what is the principle? Once you identify the subject of a sentence, look for the verb that corresponds to that subject. Here it is. Now, put the sentence accordingly. In other words, say, el juez determinó que la orden es válida. Punto. Wait, no, that's not it. It's the beginning. But then you have quien tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales. So you say, ¿quién se refiere al juez, right? ¿Verdad? So, el juez determinó que la orden es válida. Punto. Dicho juez tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales. Punto. Now you go into English. Judge determined that the order was valid. Period. Say the same judge or such judge has jurisdiction in criminal matters, or has criminal matter, or it has jurisdiction or hears criminal cases. Period. So now you created from one sentence that there was only one period here, you came up with two sentences, shorter and nice and clean in terms of the word order, subject and then the verb. Now, is there any triggering factor here that will tell you, is there anything here, for example, after the comma that will tell you, be careful? Well, obviously, if you have a subject, you have a comma, and then you have here quién, el cual, or you don't have the verb right after that, you got to look for the verb. And the verb might be 4 or 5 lines below, and that's a trick in your state exam. So you need to look for this, where the verb is, to be able to deliver. Now, this has to be done in a fraction of a second in sight translation, because you have 2 minutes to read it. So now at least half of those 2 minutes have to be spent in determining how you're going to render this, which means how you're going to start jumping, because now you're jumping segments. When I'm doing the rendition, I go, el juez determinó. So I say, the judge determined that the order was valid, period. And I have to remember that I left something out. Such judge has jurisdiction in criminal matters, period. And they keep going. That skill is difficult to develop, but in the exam, the segments are not too long. It's very obvious. It's more like this. It's not too difficult. But you still have to understand it and understand it very clearly. So we're going to be doing some work here, and I'm going to tell you how this is done so that you can master this. And you will master it immediately. And I mean, if you do what I'll tell you. But the truth of the matter is that you need to make sure that you have a subject and you have the verb next to the subject. No matter what, that's what you're looking for your delivery into English. And if you have to jump these structures or these segments, be it, but remember to put them, back in the message. And the key is that this word usually it refers to the subject. So this now, quien tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales, became a new sentence. So when you have situations like this, every time you have a comma, quien, comma, el cual, or whatever, then you're going to have an additional sentence. So if I see it, for example, if I see a paragraph that has 5 commas, and out of those 5, there are 3 with one with the word quien after comma, and then another segment with el cual, and then another segment with el cual again, we know that new structure is going to have 1 sentence for the subject verb plus 3 more. It's going to have 4. Because it's going to sound like this. El juez, coma, quien tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales, coma, determinó que la orden es válida, coma, la cual, now it refers to the order, right? La cual fue aprobada previamente en el juzgado, coma, juzgado que trata asuntos penales, punto. O el cual trata asuntos penales. So now you have, el juez determinó que la orden es válida, punto. El juez tiene jurisdicción en asuntos penales, punto. La orden, now we have la cual referring to the order. So you can see how this could become much more complex. And that's important for us to understand that. Now in the exam, it's only going to be something simple, okay? I'm not going to lie to you. It's very, very straightforward. But they mixed what we learned before and what we're learning now, this determinando and this one. And they add one more thing. Very often, you will see the documents written in Spanish that begins en la ciudad de, let's say, en la Ciudad de México a tantos días del mes, a los 15 días del mes de enero, por ejemplo, de 2015, por ejemplo, ¿no? And then there is a comma, and then it says comparece en este juzgado, por ejemplo. Okay. If I have something like en la Ciudad de México, a los 15 días del mes de enero de 2015, coma, comparece en este juzgado José Pérez, just that simple one. Well, we do have, what type of problems do we have? Well, first of all, We have en la Ciudad de México los 15 días del mes de enero de 2015. Okay, that's good. That's a problem. Then we have after that comma, we have comparece, a verb that it is conjugated. Comparece el señor José Pérez. We don't want to say appears Mr. José Pérez. We want to say Mr. José Pérez appears because we have the subject and then, okay. So now we say, okay, but this is a unit of, this refers to place and time. Can I incorporate this, move things around so that the sentence makes sense in English? Let's say in Spanish es en la Ciudad de México los 15 días del mes de enero de 2015, coma, comparece en este juzgado el señor José Pérez. Can you mix this? And of course you can say, Mr. José Pérez appears in this court on January 15, 2015, or appears in this court in Mexico City on January 15, 2015. So suddenly you move things around. This fact here that deals with location and time, that can be moved sometimes. If you want to experiment with it, when I'll give you this assignment that we're going to do in a few minutes, if you want to experiment with it, you can do move it around and see whether you can put it in the right place. But if you feel that that's too complex, there is a way out. You can treat this as a single sentence by saying the following document was executed in the city of Mexico on such and such date, period. Okay? Or you can say the following took place in the city of Mexico, blah, blah, blah. In other words, if you don't want to mix this with the other thing to create a sentence that is more natural, you can treat that as an individual element, but you have to add something. You have to add a verb. You have to say, this document was executed in the city of Mexico on such and such date. Because that's what you have in English, but at the end, usually. You know, when you have a document and people sign it, or there is a document, it's basically at the bottom of the document is where they say, this document was executed in such and such city. So what we want is we put it at the beginning. Technically, you should put it at the end, but in an exam situation, you don't want to move that much because the examiner may think that you forgot that whole phrase. So you have two ways to deal with it. You can put the following took place, okay, or this document was executed in the city of Mexico on such and such date, put a period, and then you still have to deal with comparece en este juzgado José Rodríguez. Well, you still have to say José Rodríguez appears in this court because you got to switch the subject and the verb. Put the subject first and then the verb. All right? This is called restructuring. And there is really nothing to it, but it can only be learned if you follow the steps that I'm going to tell you right now. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, okay? And the students who are watching online, I will suggest this is a good time for you to print out. Just go here, / I got it here. I think it's live site, but I don't want to give you a wrong one because then the phones are gonna start ringing like crazy. Live site.pdf. If you go there and you download that document, is the document I'm gonna give the class in about 10 minutes. Okay, you can download it in a second. Now there is a. Why do you think this? First of all, why do you think that these documents begin with "En la Ciudad de México tal día"? Because the law clerk, the person who types this in a computer, that's a format that the computer puts there. The law clerk doesn't even put it there. It's automatic. So it starts with, in a new case starts, so it says "En la Ciudad de México tal día." That's basically the format. And then they put a comma. The computer puts a comma. And now the law clerk starts reporting what he or she sees. For example, declarándose culpable a la acusación, coma. Insistiendo de que no quiere ir a la cárcel, coma. Mencionándole al juez que necesita una orden para poder ir al hospital municipal, coma. Está el acusado José Rodríguez. That's how I'm going to write it. So now the question is, you not say in English, in the city of Mexico on such and such date, such and such time, entering a guilty plea, indicating that he, what did I say the second one? Indicating that he does not want to go to jail, asking for an order to go to county hospital is the defendant Jose Perez. You can't do that because then that doesn't have, remember, you have to make sure that your version is close to the version of a similar document in English, and that's not the way you write in English. So you got to start doing the restructuring. One thing that I will do, the simplest way, is just to simply say, this document or the following took place in the city of Mexico on such and such date. And then I start moving things around. I say, the defendant, Mr. Jose Rodriguez, entered a guilty plea, period. He also indicated that he does not want to go to jail, period. Furthermore, he asked the judge for a court order so that he can go to county hospital, period. Well, for me to get to that in English, or for you to get from that step, Spanish into English, you have to go to an intermediate step. Otherwise, you will never learn this. And this is what you need to do. You need to actually, when you see a site practice in the lab that has a structure like that, don't just do that site into English. Rewrite it in Spanish so that it is ready to be transferred into English. So make the necessary changes first. If you do that 10, 15, 20 times, and there are many sites in the lab for you to do that. If you do that 10, 15, you train your eye to actually those segments. But if you don't do that intermediate step, then it's always a matter of guessing, and you never get it. Okay? Because this is a technique that comes from translation. After all, why do you think this is called site translation? Because it's verbal, and you obtain the information through your eyes, you repeat it verbally, but you must use translation principles, which are much more formal, such as restructuring, particular restructuring, and keep the right punctuation as well, okay? So that's, the steps are always, so let me just put it here. So you get the Spanish site. So let's see how we can look at this. So here's the Spanish site. Okay, you got to ask a question, okay? The question, of course, is, is restructuring needed? So restructuring, if it's yes, or if it's no. If it's no, then you concentrate on vocabulary when you're during the 2-minute period. Now, how do you know if restructuring is needed? Well, you're going to be looking at all these things that I just discussed. Now, if the answer is yes, you're going to spend at least 1 minute, which is more than enough, actually. But you may need 1 minute to restructure only the portion that calls for restructuring, not the whole site. Now, if you finish it before, how do you do that anyway? Well, I would look at the site and I said, okay, I have a verb here. How am I going to put this right? And I'm not going to be thinking in English. If the site in Spanish, I'm going to say it in my mind in Spanish how I'm going to put it. So that when it's time for me for the rendition portion of it, then my mind is already familiar with the structure, and then it can deliver it much easier. So if it's yes, you spend 1 minute on restructuring in your mind, and then 1 minute on vocabulary. Because in the interpreting exam, if they want to give you a hard time with restructuring, the vocabulary will be very, very accessible. If they want to test your vocabulary, the restructuring will be very accessible as well. There is a site in your exam, in the state exam, as well as in the federal exam, but more in the state for some reason, where they mix a little bit of both. In other words, instead of giving you a very difficult restructuring paragraph that calls for restructuring, they give you a little bit, 2, 3, 4 lines maybe. But then they also put complicated vocabulary. What's complicated vocabulary? It's going to be family law vocabulary. So the site translation in your state exam, if you read a site translation that talks about family law, la tutela, la patria potestad, albergue a los niños, cuidado y guarda, tutela y control, all those things that really seem to be family law. Be careful, because that seems to be a site that has structural issues that need to be, particularly the first paragraph. They always, in most interpreting exams, they always put that in the first paragraph, because what they want to do is they want you to concentrate on it to such an extent that you don't even read the second paragraph. And then when it's time, because you're gonna be so taken in by that, you say, how am I gonna say this? And you're not gonna read the second paragraph. And it's gonna be unbalanced. And that's another reason for them to fail you. Because unbalanced delivery is not acceptable. Meaning that the first part may be a little bit, it's okay, but the second part you have no clue. So the way to be able to take care of restructuring in a minute or less is for you to practice in the following way. So you get a site translation that is in Spanish. You think that it needs restructuring. So to the question restructuring, the answer is yes. So what you're going to do is rewrite it in Spanish. In Spanish. Now this is at home, not in the exam, clearly. Now when you rewrite it in Spanish, you apply the rules that we just mentioned. And your goal is to actually have structures that are suitable to transferring them into English. What does that mean? Subject and verb next to each other. And if you have to create many sentences, that's fine. But here's something that you should also consider. If you think that there are going to be five sentences, like the judge determined this, the judge blah, the judge blah, the judge blah blah, the judge blah blah. Don't do it like that. Just simply say the judge determined this blah, blah, and blah 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 blah. Period. Then start using things such as, furthermore, in addition, such judge blah 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 and blah 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 blah. Period. Finally, that the aforementioned judge blah 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 blah. Period. Now you're not changing the meaning of the site in any way or manner, yet you're delivering in such a way that sounds natural. All right? Now, we're going to do our first practice with this, and I'm going to give you this sheet of paper. You're going to rewrite this into Spanish, and then you're going to transfer it into English, but not looking at the original one, but the one that the second part, the intermediate part, where you rewrite it into Spanish. So you look at this, you write it into Spanish, and then you transfer the one that is in Spanish. Students who are watching this online, that's what you're going to see in, you need to go again to www.scsimedia.com / qué memoria más mala tengo. Ah, caramba, ahí está. Thank you, Richard. That's where you have to go, okay? All right, so let me give you this. I'm going to give you about, it's going to take about, to rewrite, it's not too long, and then to transfer it will probably take about 20, 25 minutes or something like that. So what we'll do is do this homework, all right? And then we will take our, I'll come around, in 20 minutes, okay? I'll discuss this briefly, and then we'll take our break. And then when we come back from the break, we do some side reading. So those of you online, you do the same thing, and then we will be discussing it as well, okay? So let me give you this document. Now, if I may call one of you to actually tell us. Is it too cold here? I think it's a little bit cold. Okay, so why don't you start this? I'll give you about 20 minutes to rewrite it. 25 minutes. To rewrite it. 20 minutes. 22. Rewrite it and then transfer it. Okay, use a separate sheet of paper. Don't use the back, because if you use the back to do this, then you have to go like that, and it's not very, very convenient. All right? All right, just please quiet. You may begin now. Okay, let's look at the restructuring more than anything. If you did not finish the translation, that is okay. But when you look at this, what are the things that stand out here? When you're, let's say you're reading this site translation. Well, you have first that structure we talk about in la ciudad de, then you have a comma with comparece, right? And look what it says, comparece en este juzgado a cargo del ciudadano juez en lo penal Alberto Rosas, quien también preside causas civiles en este mismo juzgado, dependiendo si las partes lo autorizan, Mario Solís. So, which one is the subject of this? Okay, so we can do something like this. Mario Solís comparece en este juzgado en la Ciudad de México a los 14 días del mes de enero de 2015. And that's one sentence, right? Did you get that or? Okay, and period. Este juzgado está a cargo del ciudadano juez en lo penal Alberto Rosas. Punto. Then you can say, el juez Alberto Rosas también preside causas civiles en este mismo juzgado, dependiendo si las partes lo autorizan. Punto. So that's a restructuring. So nuevamente, Mario Solís comparece en este juzgado en la Ciudad de México a los 14 días del mes de enero de 2015. Este juzgado está a cargo del ciudadano juez en lo penal Alberto Rosas. El juez Rosas también preside causas civiles en este mismo juzgado, dependiendo si las partes lo autorizan. Luego nos queda quien se presenta. ¿A qué se refiere ese quién? Entonces podemos decir, Mario Solís se presenta... ¿Quién se presenta emplazamiento? Oh, a Mario Solís se le presenta el emplazamiento 3982/2015. Punto. Porque ahí dice el cual, ¿no? Dicho emplazamiento indica que debería comparecer en este juzgado según se estableció en el mismo, con el fin de presentar su descargo en la causa número 3890/2015. Punto. Let me do that again. Mario Solís se a Mario Solís se presenta el emplazamiento 3982/2015. Dicho emplazamiento indica que debería comparecer en este juzgado según se establece en el mismo, con el fin de presentar su descargo en la causa número 3890/2015. Punto. Dicha causa, because now we're not talking about emplazamiento anymore, so we're going to put a period. Dicha causa fue promovida por la Procuraduría tras una investigación llevada a cabo por la Agencia Antidrogas del DF. Punto. Dicha agencia está encargada de penalizar el lavado de dinero y tráfico de drogas. Punto. La causa se conocerá en este juzgado dentro de los siguientes 5 días. Punto. That's it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have exactly that type of a structure, but you have to have the same idea behind it. Sometimes you combine two together, and that's fine. Now, if you restructure it like this, then you're ready to transfer it into English. And that's really the secret behind this. This is excessively hard compared to the exam. But it is a great practice to develop the skill. So you can see that we put a period when we are moving on to something new. That's one way to look at it. And usually you move to something new when you see a coma and quien, coma, el cual, la cual. This is a really red flag. Now let's look at the second paragraph. Indicando como corresponde a derecho, abriendo la causa como lo requiere la ley, iniciando la diligencia tras la presentación de las pruebas correspondientes, está el ciudadano juez en lo penal Alberto Rosas. Esta es fácil, casi igual a la que les mencioné al principio. Entonces, podemos decir, el ciudadano juez en lo penal Alberto Rosas. El problema es en qué tiempo de verbo usamos. Indica, indicó, indicará, porque dice indicando. ¿Okay? Como dice, está el ciudadano juez, debe estar todo en presente. Indica, porque dice está. Fíjese donde dice, está el ciudadano juez en lo penal Alberto Rosas. Si hubiese dicho estuvo, ahí sería pasado. Si hubiese dicho estaría, sería futuro. Entonces, el verbo que está más cerca de este señor, del sujeto, que generalmente está un poquitito antes, determina el tiempo de verbos. Entonces, el ciudadano en lo penal Alberto Rosas indica como corresponde a derecho. Además, el juez abre la causa como lo requiere la ley e inicia la diligencia tras la presentación de las pruebas correspondientes. Punto. That's another way to restructure it. Finalmente, formalizando este documento, tras la aceptación del documento acusatorio, se encuentra el subprocurador del DF, licenciado Samuel Zamora. ¿Cuál es el sujeto de todo esto? Que entonces podemos decir, el licenciado, o el subprocurador del DF, licenciado Samuel Zamora, y fíjense, formalizando, pero ¿qué tiempo de verbo corresponde aquí? A ver, vamos a ver el verbo que está inmediatamente antes de eso. Se encuentra, entonces es presente, ¿right? El subprocurador del DF, licenciado Samuel Zamora, formaliza este documento tras la aceptación del documento acusatorio. Punto. That is a complete restructuring of this whole thing. It doesn't mean this is the only answer. You can have different answers. But yet, whatever answer you have, regardless of the answer you have, you're going to have a period when you switch to something else. And you're going to have always subject and verb as close as possible. Any questions? Did you get that? Yes, sir. ¿Dónde dice emplazamiento? Quien se presenta emplazamiento, quien se le presenta sería ahí, ¿no? Entonces ahí cuando dice a Mario Solís se le presenta el emplazamiento 3982/2015, ¿no? Dicho emplazamiento indica que que Mario Solís debería comparecer en este juzgado según se establece en el mismo. Porque I don't want to say según se establece en el emplazamiento. Emplazamiento, summons. Okay, so just some key words here, okay, so that you can complete the assignment maybe at home, and those of you online, you can do the same thing. Comparece is appear. A cargo del ciudadano juez is, of course you can say in charge of, that's fine. Juez en lo penal, criminal law judge. Preside causas civiles, that's easy. Presides civil cases. Las partes lo autorizan, the parties, partes. Emplazamiento, summons. En este juzgado se estableció en el emplazamiento con el fin de presentar su descargo. ¿Qué es descargo? Defense, la causa, la cual fue promovida por la Procuraduría, es the Prosecution's Office, tras una investigación llevada a cabo por la Agencia Antidrogas del DF. This is the Drug Enforcement Agency in Mexico City. I mean, if you say the DEA, it sounds like it's the American DEA. It might be the Mexican DEA. So yes, you can say DEA, but you have to say Mexican DEA in Mexico City, obviously. Encargada de penalizar. What's penalizar? Sanction. Lavado de dinero es money laundering. Tráfico de drogas, drug trafficking. Que se conocerá, that will be heard, en este juzgado entre los siguientes 5 días. Dentro de los siguientes 5 días es within 5 days. Can you say prosecute instead of, yes, of course you can say prosecute. In charge of prosecuting, absolutely. Instead of sanctioning. Indicando como corresponde a derecho. Corresponde a derecho is what? According to the law. Well, you have to restructure. See, criminal law Judge Alberto Rosas indicates as required by law. And that's a sentence. It's a very odd sentence, but that's what it is. I don't know what it indicates. There's something missing, really. Furthermore, he opens the hearing as required by law and begins with this proceeding after the corresponding evidence was submitted. Formalizar quiere decir signed, execute. La celebración de documento acusatorio is what? Accusatory document or pleadings or simply what? Complaint. Se encuentra el subprocurador is deputy prosecutor or assistant prosecutor, licenciado Samuel Zamora. Okay. All right, so we're going to finish now, and then when we come back from the break, we're going to do some side readings. And for those of you who are online watching this live, then just complete that with the keywords that I gave you. Try to transfer that into English. And the same thing for you. Transfer that into English, okay? So that, that's a homework, basically, all right? Any questions? All right, let's take a 25-minute break. When we come back, we'll do the side readings that are assigned for today. For those of you online, this ends your live session. Thank you.